You don't want to ask questions, you want me to start talking?
Sure.
Yeah, digital?
Yep.
And how long do you have?
I have until 60 minutes.
What?
A good hour.
We have an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I should probably leave around 3:15 or something like that.
Okay.
Is it 2 or 3:30? What time is it?
Right now it's
2:46.
2:26.
2:46.
2:46 already. Oh God. Okay. Well, I can try to go. I'll go to 3:30.
Okay, great.
Anyway, although in the conference you don't want to play a long thing like that, so you can edit it however you like. Okay.
all right.
Okay. So the 17-point agreement. I think it's really great that you all are having a discussion about the 17-point agreement, and I'm sorry that I can't be there. I had to go to Sun Valley to do a talk on why the Dalai Lama matters, which I've been doing a lot the last year, and in Idaho. So I'll be in a plane while you're having this discussion. Now, the 17-point agreement, of course, was a complete forgery, actually, by the Chinese originally, because the Tibetan plenipotentiaries who went there were only delegated to discuss the situation with China, and they were not delegated to sign any treaties. And of course, so first of all, it was a complete forgery. Second, it was completely pushed down the Tibetan throat under duress, because the People's Liberation Army, I think 7th Division from Xining, had crushed the Tibetan forces at Shamdo, what the forces there were. And so the Tibetans were in no position to defend themselves, in a way, against the Chinese. So it was under duress, which also can invalidate an international treaty, even if it was properly signed, which it wasn't. But anyway, and the Dalai Lama, while the 17-point agreement was being developed, and his government had fled from Lhasa to Yatong, to Dromo actually, to where the Dungar monastery is in Dromo, near Yatong, near the border with Sikkim. And there was some faction in the Tibetan government that wanted His Holiness to escape right then. And there was a weird telegram from the U.S. that if the Dalai Lama came out and denounced the Chinese, that they would support Tibet, fight for independence, like they were doing in Korea, But it wasn't signed by the president at the time, Truman. It wasn't the UN, which was resisting the Chinese invasion of Korea. So it was finally judged by everybody that this was not a really genuine support. And one of the reasons that it wasn't a genuine support is that Nehru, the Indians, refused to allow India to be used to base a real resistance to the Chinese invasion. He made a fatal mistake. His foreign minister was a communist named Krishna Menon from Kerala. And between the two of them, they had a fantasy that they were going to be big buddies of Mao, so it wouldn't matter if the Chinese were in Tibet. Nehru and the Indian government perfectly well knew that Tibet was independent. They inherited the embassy from the British there when the British gave up the Raj in 1947. And it was really a stupid deed, which Nehru lived to regret very much. 12 years later, he very much regretted it. And he felt guilty about it, which is one reason he was nice to the Tibetans when they came out in 1959, when the Dalai Lama had to escape. So anyway, the 17-point agreement was a kind of charade to start with, and it was just an excuse for the Chinese to occupy Tibet. But there are many significant things about it anyway. And it still exists in a way in the world's mind. For example, Brent Scrowcroft, during Bush 1 administration, told the Bush cousin, Elsie Walker, who was the one who enabled us to get in to see Bush, who was the sister of a classmate of mine from prep school, actually, is how it all happened. He told her, the 17-point agreement is the best deal the Tibetans will ever get. So he knew about it himself, famous Scowcroft, So it's still in the world's mind. And there are many things when you look at it. Now, Warren Smith has analyzed it very well, and Mikkel Dunham has also discussed it to some extent. Although Warren Smith's analysis of it in relation to Stalinism and the communist attempt to assimilate minorities and all that is really very knowledgeable and very excellent. And they are much more expert than I am about such a thing. But all I would say about it, if asked, after saying what I just did, is that it's a very confusing document, actually, and it shows the confusion that was going on at the time. And it also shows how, in retrospect, how incredibly foolish Nehru was. Because, first of all, Tibet, they refer to Tibet as if it were its own country. Tibet would drive out the imperialist forces from its border and return to the family of the motherland. That's that's ambiguous, what means the family of the motherland. But drive out the imperialist forces from its borders. So Tibet has borders. Tibet is referred to as a real entity. And somehow there's imperialist forces. And we all know, of course, there was like 5 Westerners in Tibet and a few Indians. And it was ridiculous to refer to that as imperialist forces. It was just totally false. And then again, Tibet would invite the People's Liberation Army to enter central Tibet and consolidate the national defense in Lhasa. So in other words, the People's Liberation had to be invited. That means that they were recognizing that they were not the army of Tibet. That Tibet was a different country. It's actually recognized in that language. You know, without them meaning to, they're actually recognizing that. And some people believe, I don't know if Warren agrees with that, I personally believe that one of the reasons that the Chinese created all those autonomous prefectures in Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan, that are the 11 or 12 autonomous prefectures and counties. One of the reasons they did that is because they didn't expect the Indians and the UN and everyone to allow them into central Tibet. They thought they could grab some parts of eastern Tibet. They were going on the old idea that had been used by the British in the time of Simla, but never really codified in any formal way, of inner and outer Tibet, similar to inner and outer Mongolia. And I think they may have only thought that they could get inner Tibet, what they call inner Tibet, which is Kamen Amdo. And they never could get Uzang. I think they may have actually thought that there would be resistance, that the Indians would push back. They never thought the Indians would just roll over and say, sure, take Tibet, what, no problem, And then there's this other ambiguity here. When they're talking about Tibet, and then again he mentions central Tibet, they're conflating Tibet and central Tibet. They're not giving Kamen Amdo the legitimacy of being Tibet. They are autonomous prefectures of these other Indian states. And especially big bunch of Kham was taken by Sichuan. And we have to remember that Deng Xiaoping was in charge of all of this. He was the strategist for the Chinese. And he was from Chengdu, from Sichuan. So he grabbed the huge territory of Kham for Sichuan. And those big autonomous prefectures of Sichuan that he did at that time. So first he refers to Tibet would invite the PLA to enter central Tibet, because they were already in Chamdo, and then they're referring to central Tibet as if it was different from Tibet. But really, TAR is all they think of as Tibet, and that's really only a third of Tibet, and only 1/3 of the Tibetans ever lived there. 2/3 in Kamen Amdo, right? We all know that. So there's all these ambiguities and confusions here, and this also was one of the reasons that there was so much resistance in Kham and Amdo, because they immediately started killing people and destroying monasteries in Kham and Amdo, because they didn't recognize that even the positive provisions here, that they wouldn't deprive the monasteries, they wouldn't interfere with religion, they wouldn't start class struggle and all that, they were interpreting that only as meaning central Tibet. So they could do what they wanted with the supposed parts of Sichuan and Qinghai and Chinese states, you see. And then this whole fake thing. Tibet had the right to exercise autonomy under the guidance and leadership of the communists. I mean, that's just ridiculous. They've never allowed that. And therefore, many people think that they will never allow it in the future. However, I'm not convinced. I think they will allow it. They will be forced to allow it. And therefore, I'm a supporter of the Dalai Lama's middle way, of a genuine autonomy. Not to let them Chinese save face. The reason they won't give a genuine autonomy is they think it will lead to a breakaway, which it very well might. But the non-giving it will lead to a breakaway too, when there's a next war, which the Chinese are, if they continue like this, they'll definitely embark on another war, starting against Russia, actually, and Outer Mongolia. And when they do that, I'm sure that's the direction they'll go. And when they do that, then there'll be a huge thing. They will lose. And Tibet will be broken off then, but it'll be a big mess. It'll be such a mess. Nuclear pollution everywhere, because nuclear weapons will be used, and it will be really dreadful. It's much better that they realize not to do it peacefully and let go of it a little bit peacefully. They would not alter